Do we have faith or do we have a hobby? I'm David. This is March 4th, and we're on week number 69. I'm glad you could join me.
I live for the moments where I'm still in your presence.
A 60-second breakdown of what I mean by that. Our faith in Jesus Christ is meant to be a light in dark places. No matter the situation, no matter the circumstance, no matter your location on this planet, what God has called us to do is to be a light in the darkness and point people to Him. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He's given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what He has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. As a man or a woman of God or a child of God walks with the Lord through difficult circumstances and God brings us through, it's meant for other people to see so that they too can turn their faith towards the Lord. This makes the difference between having a faith in God that works during difficult circumstances because God is real and He's there working with you, or having a hobby that we say we believe, but the moment pressure comes, we put it all away and pretend like it doesn't exist. Let's look at a historical example. The Apostle Paul during his trial. I'm going to go to Acts chapter 27. Verse 1 says, "The time came, we set sail for Italy. Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman officer named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was also with us. We left on a ship whose home port was Adramyttium on the northwest coast of the province of Asia. It was scheduled to make several stops at ports along the coast of the province." As Paul is getting ready to embark on this journey, which ultimately will land him at Rome for his trial, I'm thinking about some of these Psalms that we just read. Imagine Psalm 43 verses 1 through 3, and Paul thinking about this perhaps as he's going through this situation. "Declare me innocent, O God. Defend me against these ungodly people. Rescue me from these unjust liars. For you are God, my only safe haven. Why have you tossed me aside? Why must I wander around in grief, oppressed by my enemies? Send out your light and your truth. Let them guide me. Let them lead me to your holy mountain, to the place where you live." After some great difficulty, Paul and the group of people that he's sailing with end up in a position where it says in verse 9 of Acts chapter 27, "We had lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. 'Men,' he said, 'I believe there's trouble if we go on, shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well.' But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul." I think about this in Psalm 42. It says, "As the deer longs for the streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I go and stand before Him? Day and night I have only tears for food, while my enemies continually taunt me, saying, 'Where is this God of yours?'" Can you just hear that? Paul's trying to give advice to these people because God is speaking to him. And I can just imagine them looking at him and saying, "Dude, you're the prisoner, and we're the ones that are taking you to trial, so just be quiet." And I can just feel this godly sorrow inside of Paul, just saying, "Lord, when am I going to be free from this? When am I going to get in a situation where I know that I'm in your presence and in your will?" A few very long days later, Paul and his shipmates end up in a storm. In verse 20 it says, "The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until at last all hope was gone." I'll continue to read it. "No one had eaten for a long time, and finally Paul called the crew together and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. But take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. I can just imagine everybody in that situation going, how do you know that? We're in the middle of a storm. It's lasted for days. All of our hope is gone of surviving this right now. And you're telling me that none of us is going to lose our lives. But he goes on to say this. For last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and to whom I serve stood beside me. He said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God, in his goodness, has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God, it will be just as he said, but we will be shipwrecked on an island. Now the faith of the Apostle Paul has to be stirred up because in the face of a raging storm, hopeless men, almost 300 people by the way, now he has to stand up and declare the word of the Lord and say, it will be as this angel has told me. God will be faithful. And I think about Psalm 44 now, verses 1 through 3. Oh God, we've heard it with our own ears. Our ancestors have told us of all you did in their day, in days long ago. You drove out the pagan nations by your power. You gave all the land to our ancestors. You crushed their enemies and set our ancestors free. They were slaves in Egypt. They didn't conquer the land with their swords. Oh no. It wasn't their own strong arm that gave them victory. Not that either. It was your right hand and strong arm and the blinding light from your face that helped them, for you loved them. Paul has this unshakable faith in God that in this encounter with the presence of the Lord that leads him to stand up in the middle of this situation and say, it's going to be okay. Let's turn our eyes towards the Lord. Verse 27. At about midnight on the 14th night of the storm, as we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed that land was near. The 14th night of the storm. 14 days and nights of storm where you're being battered and soaked and freezing cold and wondering if you're going to live or you're going to die, right? I can imagine Paul trying to hold on to scripture in his mind. He maintained his devotion and his worship to the Lord through this nightmare of this shipwreck, this ship that's going down. Psalm 46 says this, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. Basically, the psalmist was writing, let it all fall apart. I've still got God, and he is bigger and able to deliver me safely through this as well. Acts 27:29 is very interesting. It says at the end, 14 days of being bashed, right? All their hope is gone. That was gone earlier. Now they're really struggling. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. You ever been in a situation where you feel like you've thrown out your anchors, you've done everything you can do, all you can do is pray for daylight to come? And just when you think it's as bad as it can possibly get, these guys, listen to this, the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. They were pretending. But Paul said to the commanding officer and to the soldiers, you will all die unless the sailors stay aboard. And so the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. In the middle of the storm, they cut the rope to the lifeboat, and now they're all stuck. Whether you had faith to believe that God was going to save you or not, now you only have one place to look, and that's to the Lord for your deliverance. What strikes me in this next couple of verses is the love that Paul has for these people. He says in verse 33, just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks, he said. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your heads will perish. there's that comforting reassurance from the word of the Lord that he shares in that time of a nightmare going on with them right now. Just a constant buffeting and pounding by the wind and the waves. All your hope is gone. Your lifeboat, which might have saved you, is gone now too. You've got one recourse, and that's to turn to the Lord in this situation. And Paul reminds them, you're going to be all right. Here, have something to eat. I'm thinking about Psalm 41 here, verses 1 through 3 in this situation. Oh, the joys of those who are kind to the poor. The Lord rescues them when they're in trouble. The Lord protects them and keeps them alive. He gives them prosperity in the land and rescues them from their enemies. The Lord nurses them when they are sick and restores them to health. Poor isn't just poor in money. Poor is poor in spirit too. And there was nobody in their situation poorer than the people he was on that boat with at that moment. They had lost all hope. And when you lose all hope, you are poor. Let's go back to Acts chapter 27, verse 35. Paul, it says, then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat, all 276 of us who were on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. In this situation, Paul has not lost all faith or hope. He's holding on to the word of the Lord. And him holding on to the word of the Lord lets everybody else enter into that faith, lets everybody else enter into that hope. He says, I'm going to trust in God. Matter of fact, in the middle of this hellish scene, in the middle of this moment where we think we're all going to go under the water in this sea and never be heard from again, I'm going to stop. I'm going to break bread. And I'm going to give thanks to God, and we're going to enter into this together. He does that, and everyone takes it, and it says they're encouraged. The byproduct of him standing up and saying, let's give thanks to God, in taking bread together and saying basically we're all one in this, the byproduct is that they were all encouraged. I just imagine Paul thinking about maybe Psalm 45, 1 through 3, because the verses certainly apply. God is beautiful, and in the midst of a storm, thinking about his beauty is something that will definitely help. But also the fact that there are times when God has to get up and he has to actually act on behalf of his people like a warrior, like a defender. And if there is a time when they need this, it's right now for those men on that boat. But listen to this. Beautiful words stir my heart. I will recite a lovely poem about the king. My tongue is like the pen of a skillful poet. You are the most handsome of all. Gracious words stream from your lips. God himself has blessed you forever. Put on your sword, O mighty warrior. You are so glorious and so majestic. I can just imagine Paul saying to himself, Lord, if we're going to make it through this, I need you to put on your sword and deliver us safely from this boat onto the shore. When the morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed toward the shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship stuck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others had to hold on to planks or debris from the broken ship. And then it says, so everyone escaped safely to shore. That ship ripped apart underneath them on the rocks. The soldiers want to kill everybody to make sure the prisoners don't escape, which was probably common for them to do that. And the man that was in charge of them says, no, we're not going to do that. Let them all swim to safety. And so into the water they go. I can just imagine, like Psalm chapter 40, verses 1 through 3. Just listen to this. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He's given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. Can you imagine after you swim for your life to make it to shore, beyond your own strength, because you probably thought you were going to drown a dozen times between the point you jumped off that ship into that boiling cauldron of waves and smashing rocks and pieces of ship floating everywhere. Now you make it to the shore and you're on the sand. I can just imagine Paul thinking, God, you saved me, just like you promised. And as he comes to his wits, as he comes to his senses, and he gets up and he starts to look around and see and start counting people. The words of Psalm 47, 1 through 3. Can you imagine the joy in his heart to see that the Lord's words were true and that everybody was delivered safely? It says, "Come everyone, clap your hands, shout to God with joyful praise. For the Lord Most High is awesome. He's the great King of all the earth. He subdues the nations before us, putting our enemies beneath our feet." In this case, the enemy was the sea. The enemy was the ocean. The enemy was what they were about to be swept into and killed. God delivered them from those waves and delivered them from what they all thought for sure was certain death. And now, I can just imagine Paul saying, let's get up and give thanks to God for this. At the very least, if you were on a ship full of 276 atheists, or 275, because Paul was one believer, by the time you all made it to shore safely, I'll bet you there was pretty close to 276 believers in Jesus Christ when that happened. Every single person made it safe, just like the Lord told Paul that they would. The people on the island of Malta welcome them, and Paul is helping to start a fire or get a fire going, and he throws a bundle of sticks on the fire, and a snake comes out of there, a poisonous snake, and it bites him. And the people at first are like, "He's a murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to live." The people waited for him in verse 6, chapter 28, verse 6. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw that he wasn't harmed, they changed their minds and decided that he was a god. Now near the shore where we landed, there was an estate belonging to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us and treated us kindly for 3 days. As it happened, Publius's father was ill with fever and dysentery. Paul went in and prayed for him, and laying his hands on him, he healed him. Then all the other sick people on the island came and were healed. As a result, we were showered with honors. When the time came for us to sail, people supplied us with everything that we would need for the trip. When I asked the question at the beginning, do we have faith or do we have a hobby? The Apostle Paul demonstrates something here where he had faith. It wasn't a hobby. In one of the darkest moments of his life and the lives of these 275 men that were with him, or possibly women too, for all I know, 275 other people, his faith had to work, and it did. And then when they got to the island, God set up a situation where now all the people on the island were ready to hear the gospel. And God's power comes and heals people in this situation. A couple of times in my life over the years, rain has played a key factor in the testimony of Jesus Christ working in me. I remember one time I was at work. We went to put up some awnings on top of a car dealership in Watertown, and there was a forecast of thunder showers all day. We got there first thing in the morning, and I remember the boss tossing a raincoat at me and tossing a raincoat at my coworker, and he gets out his own raincoat, and they put theirs on, and for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't have an angel talk to me or anything like that. I'm assuming I heard some kind of message that week that just stirred up faith in me. I said, "I'm not going to put the raincoat on." He says, "Why aren't you going to put your raincoat on? It's going to rain on us." I said, "It's not going to rain on me." Well, he thought I was crazy. And for some reason, no matter how mad he got, we went to work. He wore his raincoat for the first, I don't know, half of the day or whatever. And then the second half of the day, he ended up tying it around. He kept that thing next to himself all day long. I didn't. At the end of the day, when we were all done working, we looked over to Dry Hill. I saw rain pouring down on Dry Hill. We could look out over Sackett's Harbor. I saw Sackett's Harbor off in the distance being showered. We looked over to the right. It looked like the square was being pummeled with a torrent of rain. Looked behind us into the hills over towards State Street Hill. That looked like it was being pummeled with rain. And not one drop in the place where we were working. In that situation, what happened was it gave rise to the superstition that, if you don't want it to rain on you, bring Dave with you. If you bring Dave with you, then it won't rain. Well, that's superstition, right? That's ludicrous. What really was at work? Faith. Faith that was real in a situation where I was feeling pressed, where I was feeling that somebody was trying to make me do something that I believed in my heart that God didn't want me to do. And so I stood up and I said, no, I'm not doing that because God doesn't want me to do that. Period. And he honored it. And then, that became something where I could use it to share the testimony of Jesus with the people that I worked with. Later on, there was a friend of ours that we would go and see. And there was a season where, or maybe it was one season where she was struggling with her garden, no rain anywhere. And when Heather and I went to see her and pray with her and spend time with her to encourage her in the Lord, because she's a believer and we believe in the good things that God has for this person, we cried out for rain in the situation where her garden was dying, and then boom, God brings the rain. Another situation where you're sent into someplace dark in somebody's life and you cry out for the presence of the Lord, and he comes in a powerful way to demonstrate that your faith it's not a hobby. Your faith is something that's real. Your faith is something that's meant to impact other people's lives, and it sparks faith in other people. So what about you? Where has God got your feet planted right now, where he's calling you to demonstrate faith? Where he's calling you to stand up and say, I believe the word of the Lord. Maybe it's a moral dilemma. Maybe you're being asked to stand up for something that's morally right according to the word of God that the world says is wrong. It's no secret right now that in our world, evil is called good and good is called evil. And the only standard that we can use to determine what really is good and what really is evil is the word of God. It doesn't change. It never will. It's always going to say that lying is wrong. It's always going to say that stealing is wrong. It's always going to say that murder is wrong. It's always going to say that we're supposed to love people the way that we want to be loved and treat people the way that we want to be treated. Those are heavenly concepts that do not change. Maybe you're simply being challenged to forgive people or to, reach out in love or kindness towards other people who need it. Whatever the situation, whatever the circumstance, what God has determined is that you, as a believer in Jesus Christ, are in that place to demonstrate that faith in him is rewarded, that faith in him doesn't go unanswered, that when you turn your eyes and you turn your heart towards the Lord, he's not going to just leave you be and ignore what you're saying. That when you cry out to him, he answers, just like it says in the Psalms that people knew thousands and thousands of years ago. Just like it says in Paul's account of what happened to him on that ship thousands of years ago. Just like it happened for me 10 to 20 years ago or less. And I'm sure you've got stories you can share too. When we cry out to God, he is faithful to answer. So that's my encouragement for you this week, brothers and sisters. And I hope that this is challenging for you and to walk in the faith of the Apostle Paul, to walk in the faith of the psalmists, and to observe faith in other brothers and sisters and understand that Jesus is calling us all to head into darkness and do what he would expect us to do in that darkness, and that's to shine the presence of God in that place. It's not for the cowardly. As a matter of fact, in Revelation it says that the coward doesn't make it into the kingdom of heaven. So be brave. I love you all. God bless you.